Shalom, shalom, everyone. I am Ayana. This is the YHUHderek channel. Today we will be talking about the Salt Covenant, which is another installment of the Making of a Covenant series. Let us get started. But first, I would like to thank everyone who supports the channel. These people here gave financial contributions. There are more, but they would like to remain anonymous. Thank you so very much for being considerate and donating to the channel to help keep this channel going. We do have a couple of avenues for people who would like to contribute monetary donations. The first one is through PayPal using our email address, YHUHderek@mail.com, and also through CashApp, which is $YHUHderek. Also, we do have a digital downloads page at shoply.com/YHUHderek, where we have items that would help further your education and understanding of Scripture. So if you are interested in supporting this channel, if you like the content that you get to watch, please consider donating. And also, even if you don't want to donate financially, please hit the subscribe button and also the bell button to let you know when a new video is uploaded. We could greatly use your support in that way also. All right, so again, these are the 4 parts, just going over what is involved in making a covenant. So to have pure intentions of the mind, spirit, and body for all parties involved in a covenant, to honor the vow, oath, pledge, or whatever according to the contents of the covenant, the parameters thereof. The third part, that all parties are allies throughout the duration of the covenant. And lastly, and most importantly, that all covenants have YHUH at its core. All right, so this week we are talking about the Salt Covenant. And when it comes to salt, as I did my research into salt, there were both instances of good applications of salt and also bad applications of salt. So it's a balancing act that has, the outcome depends on the situation. So the amount of salt used causes different effects. A little salt in a meal improves the flavor of that meal, but too much salt in that same dish and it becomes inedible. An abundance of salt can preserve organic matter from putrefaction. So think about all of the seas of the earth and all of the trillions upon trillions of aquatic life in them. And this is a question that I've always asked myself. Why aren't the seas rancid from all the dead animals that have been in them? And the answer is salt. Right? It keeps the waters, you can't drink seawater, but it keeps the waters from being absolutely, disgusting, right? So that is one of the big answers. In addition, an overabundance of salt can kill everything to the point that nothing can grow or will ever grow. And in using scripture, we're going to go through all these applications that display this balancing act. So for the destructive properties or the destructive use of salt, you can find them in these verses. So Bereshith chapter 19, right? That's the story of Lot and his wife and the destruction of Sodom and all the other 4 cities. You can find it in Deuteronomy 19, which is the covenant that YHUH makes with Yasharel regarding Moab, right? And then the last one you can find, the actual verse is in Judges 9, verse 45, but you can read that whole chapter where it talks about how I can't remember the name of the guy. He comes, he destroys one of Yasharel's cities, and he sows it with salt so that nothing can grow again. So just take a look at those. You can read those chapters, and it will show you the destruction using salt. So, properties of salt. Salt is plenteous to the earth, right? The earth was twice covered by seas, which is salt water. In its solid form, salt, when dried, is a crystal, right? It's a crystal like object. But when it's dissolved, it can't be distinguished from the water it's dissolved in or any other substance that salt is in. But its presence is still there, and you can tell that by tasting it, sometimes by smelling it, right? Because the oceans, you can smell the salty water. Salt is practically indestructible. This is something that I personally did not know. It has a ridiculously high boiling point, which is 2,575 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So there's no application, you in your kitchen or you in your outdoor pit, that you ever are going to get salt to like boil. It would take like something like fire and brimstone being rained down from the Shamayim, right? For that to happen. Salt is necessary for life and health, and that's all life, right? So both people and animals need salt for nutrition. The lack of salt in people can disrupt the workings of their nervous systems, and it can also cause muscle spasms. Lack of salt in animals can impede their growth. It can impede milk production in mammals, and it can also leave them susceptible to diseases. Salt is also needed in the ground for gardening and farming. Salt carries vital nutrients that the earth needs for plant production and growth, and it also helps strengthen the walls of cells, right? So that helps in reproduction or the fruiting of whatever plant it is. But all these things, right? Because salt is good for flavor. Salt, it does different things within different types. Different applications. For what I mean is, salt does different things to the item it's in, right? So, for example, I don't know if you knew this or not, but for years I was a baker, right? I was an organic baker, and I know that when you add salt to eggs, it softens the protein bonds in eggs, right? But that same salt, if you put it in bread, and we'll talk about that a little bit further, it can help with the browning of the bread in the oven. It helps the bread be soft, right? So it just depends on what salt is used for. All right. So let's talk about some scriptures talking about the salt covenant. Just one moment, please. All right. So let's look at YHUH chapter 2, verse 13. And this is Yahuwah talking to Arun. And all sacrifice offerings, which in this case is grain. If you're reading the KJV version, it will say meat. But meat, back in the times of when the KJV was written, meat meant any type of food. This whole chapter is talking about grain offerings, which is why I have grain in parentheses. The the word grain is not in the scripture, but I just wanted to put that in there so that you could understand that. So, in all sacrifice offerings, grain offerings, you shall season with salt, and you shall not stop the salt covenant of your YHUH from your offering, from your grain offering, from all your sacrifices, you shall offer salt. All right. So, what's interesting about this particular verse is a couple of things. First of all, the word for you shall not stop is the word Shabbath. If you remember, Shabbath means to stop, to rest, to cease, right? So YHUH is saying you shall not cease or you shall not rest the salt covenant of your YHUH. Now, the other interesting thing in this verse is that salt is mentioned 4 times. That's all of these words in yellow, right? So when YHUH tells Aaron in all his sacrifice grain offerings, you shall season. That word is literally salt. So all your sacrificed grain offerings shall be salted with salt, right? And you shall not stop the salt covenant of your YHUH from your grain offerings. From all your sacrifices you shall offer salt. So that word salt is malak, and it's not malak in reference to the king or messengers or kingdom, because that malak ends with a kop or a kef with nakud. This malak ends with a ket, right, or a cot, right? So you can find that in H4414 through 4420, and it means to something that it dissolves or melts away or vanishes. And we mentioned that when salt is in its liquid form, it can't really be, if you're looking at it, it can't be distinguished from whatever liquid or whatever it's in. Now, Malak also makes reference to salt, but it also means a sailor who sails on the seas, which is salt water, right? So, YHUH really means it when something is mentioned more than once. It deepens the intent, right? So this verse alone, salt Malak, is in here 4 times. Now the word covenant, or I should say the actual phrase salt covenant of your YHUH, right? We know that covenant is baryath, which is 2 words. Bar, meaning to be pure or clean, right? We talked about this in the first video. What is a covenant? All covenants, you have to be pure, you have to be clean. Pure is the word tahar, right? You have to be clean. Now, a covenant, which yath means sign, right? Bar yath, a sign of cleanness, a sign of pureness. So, this literally YHUH is saying, in all of your grain sacrifice offerings, you shall season with salt, and you shall not rest the salt purity, because bar means to be pure, the salt cleanliness of your YHUH. So it is a covenant of being pure. Again, covenant means pure, but salt is also purifying. So there's a double emphasis on being pure. So the double emphasis of being pure of your YHUH, right? And this is for all grain offerings except for Bakor, which is the first fruits, right? So every grain offering has to have salt. So let's look at a couple verses before the last one, because if you can see, this was verse 13. So to go a little bit more into that, we're going to go into verse 11. Same chapter, same book, verse 11. No sacrifice grain offering which you shall bring to YHUH shall be made with leaven. For you shall burn no leaven, nor any honey in the offering of YHUH made by fire. Just one moment. I apologize. I've been having allergy attacks lately, so that's why you hear the brief pause. Okay. So, salt, there's a purpose to salt being in grain and bread, and I mentioned that a couple slides ago about cooking. So, the ultimate reason that YHUH didn't want leaven in his grain sacrifices is because leaven in scripture is representative of sin. Yeast ferments or a controlled spoiling, right? Yeast, it reacts to the bread, it releases gases, and it puffs up the bread, right? And it causes the bread to swell. Well, if you take yeast and notate that that is a representation of sin, then your sin is going through, is being, is prevalent throughout that bread. All right, so salt is a purifier. When you add salt to bread, it slows down the growth of yeast. Okay, salt slows down the growth of yeast. That's why if you know how to cook bread, you never mix salt and yeast together at the same time. You usually put the yeast in your bread, your flour mixture, right? And then you put the salt. Because if salt goes in with the yeast, it will kill the yeast and there'll be no growth at all, no production of the yeast. And that's what I'm putting here. And I want you to remember this. If you put enough salt in bread, it will kill the yeast growth altogether, making the bread last longer. So that's another property of salt, is that it slows down the molding process, and your bread will last a longer length of time than it would if there were no salt in the bread. It also improves the taste of the bread, right? Because salt, you add the right amount of salt to anything, it's delicious, even like desserts and things like that. The flavor of salt is strong, and it enhances flavor, and it permeates everything that it is added to. So if you want to see some verses that pertain to leaven as sin, they're down here, right? You can take a look at those on your own leisure, but I wanted to put one more aside. This has nothing to do with salt and leavening and bread, but honey. Remember when Yasharel, because YHUH says you should not burn leaven or any honey. Honey is represented, is what the taste of manna was. Remember when YHUH rained down the manna, and or I should say mana. What is it? I pray, what is it? That's what it means. What is it? It tasted like honey. It was wafers and it tasted like honey, and it came down from the Shamayim. I can't recall the exact chapter and verse, but it does say in Psalms that manna is the food of the Malachim, the messengers. So you don't want to burn honey because that is representative of the food from heaven, right? Besides Yahusha, because Yahusha later describes he's the bread, right, from heaven. But you don't want to burn that because of that, and you don't want to burn leaven because it's representation of sin. Just one moment. All right, so now we are getting to what Yahusha said. So with all that in mind, when Yahusha said he is the bread of life in Yahuchanan 6:35, he is talking about unleavened bread. So when you look up that word bread in that verse, it will tell you that it's bread made with flour and water, no leavening, nothing, right? So that's what he's talking about, and he's making the analogy that he doesn't have sin, which no yeast, no leaven, right? And because he is sinless, Being sinless leads to everlasting life. So that is what he's referring to. You can read that whole chapter. It's a whole thing about bread and the challenges of the Pharisees and things like that. But also, in addition to that, in a previous couple of verses, in verse 27, YHUH, he explains, don't labor for food, in this case bread, because that chapter is pretty much talking about bread. Don't labor for bread that perishes, but for bread which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you. For he is whom Ab Yahuwah, or Father Yahuwah, sealed. So he's saying right here to go on to what his reference to the bread of life. Don't work for bread that perishes or bread that has yeast in it, right? Because yeasted bread will go bad, right? He's also talking about your life. Don't labor after stuff that does not last. Don't labor after stuff that spoils badly, but go for the stuff that endures, meaning the salt, it makes the bread last longer. But he's also talking about Yahuwah's word, which will lead to everlasting life. So he's kind of got a double, sort of triple entendre right there. He's talking about bread, but he's talking about spiritual things. And he's making reference to the unleavened bread that was required in sacrifices or grain offerings to Yahuwah. Yahusha also refers to Yahuwah's people, Yasharel, as the salt of the earth in Matthew 5:13, meaning that Yasharel, which are, Yahuwah's kingdom of priests, and we'll get to that, they are used both to retard or stop sin, right, in the earth, and imbue the flavor of righteousness to all the peoples of the earth. So you are salt, your flavor or savor, as it says in the KJV, you flavor people, right? When you give them the word of Yahuwah, you're flavoring them. You're also, by teaching righteousness and living righteously according to Yahuwah's covenant, you are also, by doing that, you are stopping the growth of yeast, just like the growth of sin, which is yeast, which is likened to bread, right? Yeast and bread, it makes the bread swell, so it's fluffy and everything like that. But in the case that yeast or sin is not good, you are representing the stopping of that yeast or sin. Okay, so now we're going to talk about salt in scripture being used as a perpetual covenant, because ultimately that is what salt represents. It's a very serious covenant. It's not something to be lightly. It's a representative of eternity, right? Which is what I have here. So we're going to look in Second Chronicles 13 verses 4 through 5. And this is King Abijah, or Abijah in the KJV if you use that. His name literally means Yahuwah is my father. He is about to go to war with King Jeroboam. We've talked about King Jeroboam in a couple of videos. He was the first king of the split kingdom of Yasharel, right? So Abijah is the king of Yehudah. This is when the nation is split after Rehoboam, right? Rehoboam, he says, I'm going to be more treacherous to you in taxes and stuff than Shaluma. So Jeroboam, he is the first king of the split nation of Yasharel. Abijah is, or I should more probably say Abia, right? Abia is the king of YHUH, and he is Daud's great grandson. So Abiah is the son of Rehoboam. Sorry, Rehoboam. Rehoboam is the son of Solomon, and Solomon is the son of Daud. So Abiah is Daud's great grandson. So he stood on the mount of Zamaryaam, which that means like double wool or double wool fleece, which is in the mountains of Ephraim, and said, "Hear me, Jeroboam, and all of the kingdom of Yasharel, the split kingdom. Should you not know that YHUH the Eluah of Yasharah gave the kingdom of Yasharah to Daud forever, to him and his sons by a covenant of salt?" So in this verse, now you can read the whole chapter, but in this verse, we see a direct correlation between salt and eternity, right? The kingdom of Yasharel to Daud forever. Uh that comes to its fruition through Yahusha, who's a descendant of Daud, right? He will be the king forever over Yasharel, and he will also be the Khan Gadol, or the Kahan Gadol, the high priest over Yasharel forever too. So now, as far as, because when I saw this, I wanted to see if there was an instance where David eats salt or anything like that. Now, it does happen, right? David does eat the Kodash unleavened bread in the Kadush place in the tabernacle of YHUH, but it doesn't happen until 1 Sam chapter 21 verses 1 through 5. It's not the bread for that day. The high priest removed that bread and put fresh bread in, but he does give that bread to Daud, and Daud does eat it. So if you want to see YHUH's vow to Daud, about, his descendants will be king forever, you can find that in 2 Samuel chapter 7 verses 12 through 16. Just one moment. All right, so let's just review what a salt covenant is. It is a very serious covenant for the perpetuity of time, or for eternity. Just like salt is everywhere and in all of YHUH's creations on the earth, YHUH demands that we remember to keep his salt covenant, or his salt purification of all grain/bread sacrifice offering, with the exception of Bakor first fruits, right? We, being YHUH's kingdom of priests, which you can find in this verse, are required to be just like salt. Remember, Yahusha called us the salt of the earth, both in participating in the spreading of YHUH's eternal covenant through Yahusha, and to inhibit sin from persevering throughout the earth, which is likened to yeast permeating through all of the bread. It just takes a little bit of yeast. It goes through all the bread. We are to stop that by living righteously, and then showing, how how everyone is supposed to follow Yahuwah's covenant. I hope that you enjoyed that today. But I want to talk a little bit about this whole process. I know in all the videos since Yom Kippur, I think there's been 7 or 8 videos, I keep talking about a period of purification. We are in a period of purification. I don't know, I don't get the sense that a lot of people are taking that seriously. There's always a lot to distract you from doing things, but I want you to please hear me. So, Again, as stated with the Yom Kippur video, this is a period of purification for YHUH. All of the videos made since then have been about getting cleansed from sin and avoid getting entrapped by enemies. Both the ultimate enemy, Shaitan, and enemies represented here on earth through people. I do not know how long this period will last because it will be a period. It will not last forever. But if I were to guess, and I want to emphasize this is just a guess, this is not a prophecy, this is just a guess. It would be, this purification period would be until Pesach at the beginning of the year, right? Of YHUH's year. When the separation of Yasharel took place from Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim represented sin, it represented idolatry, it represented evil, it represents enslavement. That would be a guess. I want to emphasize that would be my guess. I cannot tell you when YHUH says the purification is done, but that's my guess, right? As a believing brother said in his correspondence to me, we are going through a process of cleansing, separation, and creation. Right now, we're in the cleansing, purifying stage, right? When the purification stops, when that stage ends, we will be entering into the separation process. YHUH will begin the proving process of each one of us individually and of Yasharel nationally, right? To see if we truly believe in him by looking at our actions. When separation begins, and I want you to understand this, and I want you to get this in, you may have to separate from your job. You may have to separate from your home. You may have to separate from your family, your children, your spouse. You may have to separate yourself physically, right? From out of an environment or out of friends. That's going to be a harder process. That's why it's very, very, very important. By looking at this series, Making a Covenant, is to help all of us, me too, to avoid being trapped and beholden to all enemies who will use covenants as a way to call us to fall into sin and destruction. Please take this seriously. These videos are not for entertainment. These videos are for education and warning. Okay? All right. So we covered the salt covenant. We covered the token covenant. We talked about refusing a covenant. We talked about what is a covenant and how to make it. And we'll keep going. So here is my contact information. You can reach me by email at YHUHderek@mail.com. Please don't put Gmail. I don't have a Gmail account. My account is through mail, mail.com. As always, here is the source and the rest of the resources that I used to compile this video. I want to thank you all. Please subscribe, donate, and may you have a good morning, evening, or afternoon. May YHUH continue to be with you. And please, I pray that all of you hear YHUH when he talks to you, when he speaks to you, and to retain it into your memory and to have the will to follow it. Thank you. Shalom.